All right, well, welcome everyone and good morning. Thanks for joining us for this morning's discussion on what our current pandemic has taught us as communications professionals about empathy, inequality, and active listening in a crisis. I hope you and your families are staying safe and healthy. My name is Mike Friedman. I have the honor of serving as president of PRSA's Buffalo Niagara chapter this year. You know, it's really been wonderful to see such strong turnout at these virtual events during what is unquestionably an unusual period in our world. And it's really also been incredibly inspiring to have so many of our members like Therese and Christy volunteer their time and expertise to us all. Before we get started, I want to offer a quick thank you to the sponsors of our chapter this year, 19 Ideas and St. Bonaventure University. We are most appreciative of their support. And then just a few quick housekeeping items. As I mentioned at the top, today's session is being recorded, so you will have an opportunity to rewatch it if you think you missed anything or you want to go back and reference any of the great material that we're going to hear today. I'd ask you to please keep your microphone on mute when you aren't speaking, just so that we can eliminate as much background noise as possible. And also encourage you to please take advantage of the interactions available in the chat window. You can begin asking questions while Therese and Christy are presenting, and we will answer as many of those as we can when they are finished. And so with that being said, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. I will go first with Therese first. Am I close?
First.
First. That's easier. Even
That's okay.
easier. I'm sorry. Therese is president and founder of First Consulting Corporation, an entrepreneur and communication expert working side by side with the region's most prominent businesses and business leaders. Therese brings more than 20 years of experience to her consulting practice and faculty position in the communication department at Buffalo State College. Her career has spanned across various sectors, including her current role as founder and president of the communication strategy firm First Consulting. Prior to becoming a business owner, Therese served in leadership roles at the Buffalo Niagara Partnership, Uniland Development Company, Health Now New York, and the City of Buffalo. Therese holds a bachelor's degree from Canisius College and a master's from Buffalo State, and she's also a graduate of UB's Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership. So I see just about every college on there except Niagara University, and I'm trying not to hold that against her.
I'm sorry. There's still time.
There's still time, always. Among Therese's many awards and honors, she is the 2019 recipient of our chapter's Macy Randazzo Outstanding Practitioner Award. She's a proud Business First 40 Under 40 Award winner and a graduate of Leadership Buffalo. Active in the community, she volunteers her time with several community civic and professional organizations, including the Canisius College Board of Regents, the Foundation Board of Best Self Behavioral Health, and the United Way of Buffalo in Erie County's Marketing Committee. Welcome, Therese.
Thank you.
And joining Therese is Christy Francis, the founding member of Fresh Batch Insights. As the co-founder of Fresh Batch, she specializes in qualitative market research for organizations across a variety of industries. She helps clients build an ever-evolving narrative that sees consumers as a culture, not a collection of static data points. Her work is often the foundation for compelling marketing, branding, and product development. In addition to her consulting work, Christy is a consumer and marketing insight specialist at Damon College. She recently completed a semester as an adjunct instructor for UB's MA in Arts Management. She holds a BS in Business Administration and an MBA from UB. In addition to her work within the marketing realm, Christy is also an illustrator and photographer. She owns and operates Avery and Harlow, an online art business named for her twin daughters, and she volunteers as an event photographer for Lollipop Farm Humane Society of Greater Rochester. Christy sits on the board of Massachusetts Avenue Project, a nonprofit urban farm on Buffalo's west side. Two very experienced and outstanding practitioners. And I'm looking forward, as we all are, to hearing what they have to say today. And so now I will turn the spotlight over to Christy and to Therese. Help us understand how our communication can be more human.
Thank you. Let me see here. All right. I think your introduction of us was perhaps better than we would have done with our own bios. So
Yes.
we'll probably breeze through that piece of the presentation. If I
Mhm.
can get it shared here. Okay. All right, can everybody see it? Is it, we good? Therese, can you see it?
I'm good. I can see it.
All right, perfect. Oh, and you know what else? I'm getting notifications that people are entering the waiting room. Is that something that I should hit admit on?
You don't need to worry about it. I'll handle that for you, Christy.
Okay, all right.
Actually, wait, no, you may, because I think that I made you
because you're the
host, right?
This is in the host now? Okay, that's what I was worried about. All right.
So just let them in now, and then you can go on.
All right, that sounds good. They're in now. We got it.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you again for that fantastic introduction. I think before we get started, I want to back up a little bit and just kind of talk about the reason that we wanted to get together and have this conversation, and just, you know, some of the thoughts that Therese and I have had and discussions that we have had that sort of, you know, inspired the content for today's conversation. So I think, you know, the past few months, certainly we all have plenty of personal experiences that we could share about how this pandemic and this particular moment in history has really been different, depending on who you talk to, but collectively extremely challenging. So I think, you know, I go back to a personal story. And again, you know, I'm so glad that we had that introduction up front. My job is to go out and have conversations with people to understand their life and sort of the context that can be provided through qualitative research on how maybe my clients' products fit into their lives, or you know, solutions that I'm exploring. I spend a lot of time having conversations, and part of that is also observing people and understanding not just what they tell you, but also when you read between the lines, kind of what they're trying to tell you, right? So as a result of that type of work, I'm kind of in this constant mode where I'm always watching what people are doing when I go out somewhere. I'm always observing. I'm kind of always researching. And I remember it was right before schools closed, back in March, I suppose, that I went out to the grocery store, just kind of for this casual, you know, shop, which I do all the time. Grocery store shopping is very therapeutic for me, as I'm sure it is for many people. And I'm going down the aisles, and I'm noticing that people have stopped making eye contact. And I know that seems like this very sort of, you know, small thing to notice. And certainly I don't go to the grocery store for all of my social interactions, but I had kind of this moment looking around where I thought, right? Like how frightened do people have to be? How concerned do they have to be? How much of the unknown are we all facing that we aren't even lifting our heads to look at each other when we're out grocery shopping? And I think it was this moment for me of realizing that maybe at that moment in time, you know, obviously we didn't have a crystal ball. We didn't know how things were going to evolve or the conversations that were going to be had over the following months. But I knew that things were not good. And I knew that we were facing something really challenging, just from sort of that one brief observation. And I think, you know, coming home, going onto my email and doing all the things that I also usually do, I noticed that there was a real lack of alignment around what I was hearing from retailers, for instance, right, that were spamming me. So I'm going to the grocery store now, and this is an entirely unnerving experience. I'm not sure what life, has planned next. And then I'm on my email, and, the retailers who I've always kind of shopped for seem to be completely out of sync to some extent with what's going on in the world. So we saw more examples of this. Gal Gadot's Imagine video comes to mind, if anybody is familiar with that. A lot of celebrities singing, and the rest of us kind of out here trying to figure out what's going on. Just tremendous misalignment around a lot of the messaging that was floating around. And I think since that point, which honestly might as well be 10 years ago, we've learned so much about how brands are being held accountable for what they say, and not just what they say, but what they do. So I think, Therese and I, we've collected some examples that we're hoping are really helpful for you, to think through, not just for your organizations or, for your clients, but also for you as people, just to kind of see this and be aware of the world that we're living in, and some of the emerging data that I think paints a really interesting picture of what we're all dealing with. So Therese, do you have anything to add to that at all? I didn't want to.
No, that was excellent. I just to expand on it for 2 seconds, and to say that whole idea of eye contact is sort of literal and figurative at the same time, because when you read what people are saying and some of the examples that we'll talk about today, that lack of connection is so apparent in so many ways. So just keeping in mind as we talk through today, and questions that you might have for discussion, that you have to remember to always put yourself in someone else's shoes, as difficult as that might be right now. And remember to try to make that contact as much as possible by putting yourself, in the place of what somebody else might be facing right now, is probably the most important thing that Christy and I took away from our entire preparation for this talk. So.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Therese. Yeah. And I completely agree with everything you're saying there too. So, okay, we will move on to the next portion of our presentation. We have structured this in a way that we're hoping is a little bit, maybe more dynamic than a standard PowerPoint presentation. Therese and I were very much inspired by some of those lists that you see, particularly from fashion retailers or fashion magazines, around what you should toss and what you should keep for the upcoming season. So we've kind of built this presentation within that structure, and addressed, things that I think have always been best practices, and how important it is to sort of move forward, be progressive, take those from best practice into sort of just adopting them and accepting them as necessity. So that's how we've structured this today, and we're excited to talk. We're excited to share. So Therese, I'm gonna go to your bio here, I think.
Which I agree. I think we can probably scoot right past.
Yeah.
But what I will say though is, again, I want to thank everybody for being here today and taking the time to do this, and to Michael and the chapter for having us. If any of my experiences or background cause you to have questions about things you might be pursuing in your career, or questions that you might have, especially as it relates to, getting different degrees, or, the CEL program that I went through, or anything at all, I just like to say to please feel free to ask. Otherwise though, I think we can probably go right past this. And thank you again. Okay.
Well, there you are, and you have a different hair color. So
and
now,
there I am, and my pandemic black is now turned into pandemic blonde. So
yes, perfect.
Hides the grays.
All right, great. I'm gonna do the same thing, and I echo what Therese said. This was my neatly kept pixie haircut before we all sort of came into the current situation we're in here. So I also had different hair. So, okay. So let's move into the content piece here. And I want to start with a term that I find to be just such a really powerful way to sum up how we are all experiencing this. But this is a term that we came across through some of our research, the patchwork pandemic, okay? So I think unlike what we've seen perhaps with, with previous moments in history where we're dealing with a recession or some sort of turmoil, the way that this pandemic has impacted individuals, their communities, right? Specific sort of, different groups economically or in terms of educational background, it looks very, very different. We are all facing challenges, certainly, but the choices that we are being forced to make and the choices that, we have ahead of us. I think back to last night, I was watching the school board meeting for my local district, and I was just trying to kind of wrap my head around the specifics of everybody's different sort of set of considerations when they're thinking about whether or not to send children back to school, and how varied those are depending on household and location and all these other considerations. The patchwork pandemic and the idea of what that looks like, we really want you to keep that in mind as we talk through this. And we have some stats, because we are stats geeks, that we've pulled to support this idea that I think really present a very sort of compelling viewpoint. So one that stands out to me, quote-wise, is this idea that what's happening is not one crisis, but many interconnected ones. And I think, we've seen that now, even more so, I think, than when we kind of decided we were going to have this conversation today, right? Things are constantly evolving. You wake up in the morning and you don't know how things might have changed since the day before. But it seems that every decision that is made and every choice we're kind of faced with within our respective households, there is some sort of consequence to that, right? Or some sort of network that you have to kind of think about that choice in the context of. And this quote does a great job, I think, summing that up as well. So this stat, again, one of the very, very powerful stats that I think we came across, this is from April. Pew Research put this out there, but 43% of US adults said that they or someone in their household suffered a job loss or a pay cut due to the pandemic. I think it's so important to look at things like this because certainly, okay, I mean, first of all, this is almost half of households have somebody in the household who's been impacted in this way. And if you think about that, right, it's of course not the case that everybody has two-income households. There are plenty of people who are one-income households and maybe facing job loss or, a significant reduction in the amount of money that they're earning. This is to me, this is a very scary statistic. And I think it does a great job sort of level setting where we are collectively in this situation as you start to kind of think through all the other little interconnected pieces and experiences. So, at this point, and this is a great article that Therese came across, when you think about marketing activity, and I would even say the role of organizations within our culture, their purpose, what they stand for, what they're able to do, who they're able to help. The idea that activity has to be led more by people than profit really plays well to our industry's strength at this particular moment, right? The ability to be emotionally intelligent, the ability to show empathy, the ability to listen. So this is I think just a great way to kind of set up what we're going to continue to talk about. Therese, do you have any?
It's really our time to shine as PR professionals. I know I've talked to so many colleagues over the past several months that have been faced with that challenge of having the seat at the table that you need right now to really make that impact, whether it's for a client, your own internal organization, for a business that you might be running. Whatever the case may be, right now, if there is ever a time for someone with a communications expertise to make sure that their colleagues, clients, et cetera, know that they bring value, now is the time. And that value, oftentimes, as we all know, that value is often underestimated. So when I read this article, I immediately thought to myself, if we ever questioned the fact that we need to be there with that C-suite at the table, making sure that we are bringing up topics that are critically important right now to how we communicate with our stakeholders, now is the time. So I would encourage all of you, if you haven't already done so, to, you know, really take the bull by the horns, have that courage to just say, I need to be at the table. Communication strategy needs to be apparent now more than ever. So let's make sure that we have that overlay across all we're doing.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. And I think, yeah, very powerful. Great way to, you know, introduce what we're going to keep talking about here. So, all right, let's get into our toss it, keep it list. And again, a great point that I think could be made here, Therese, is your point, but the idea that really this list would not be different. I think if you look back on this in February, the difference now is how we're under a microscope. And do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think you were very articulate in describing this.
Well, that whole idea of, you know, it's interesting. It's, you know, it's that whole idea of terms changing over time. Like, we don't necessarily call things newsletters anymore that are still newsletters. It's really that idea of, you know, our industry loves buzzwords and buzz terms and changing, you know, changing dialogue. And of course, now we have big reason to make sure that we're doing this toss and keep. But like Christy said, if we were talking in February doing this same webinar and someone said to us, you know, what should we continue to do and what shouldn't we continue to do, these bullets would look the same. Why is that? Because you never want to make decisions in a vacuum. You know, you never want to lean on that this is how we've always done it. You never want to be so, you know, focused internally that you're not thinking externally. You know, you never want to make sure that, you know, hey, you know, we need to keep saying things the same way we said them yesterday, because that's just how we've always done it. You know, you can't, those things are all relevant no matter what the date on the calendar is. Well, what's most important, as Christy said, is that now those of us that are being charged with communicating are under a microscope more than ever. And our organizations and our clients are under microscopes as well. And they're leaning on us more than ever to make sure that as we engage with them, that we're asking the right questions, that we're making sure we have open and honest dialogue with them as well. You know, I always say to clients and colleagues, you know, be careful, because I'm going to be the one that tells you what you don't want to hear. But that's our job, right? That's our job. So remember that that's our job. And again, if there were any fear around that ability to be open and honest, you know, don't have that fear. You know, your expertise is what's so important right now. So I would say those, you know, making those bold statements as well, you know, around, you know, that proactive thought and empathy, we'll get into some examples, is sometimes it's best for you to advise a client and advise an organization that you're better off making that great, big, bold statement to the people that you know support you. And those people will get behind you and rally for you at a time when you need that close-knit group to do so. And we'll get into more of that in a little bit. Christy, do you have anything else to add?
I mean, I think everything you said was right on point. I completely agree. And you know, when I was looking through the toss it list, it was interesting to me because I do think there have been instances or conversations that I've heard or, you know, overheard where people are reluctant to let some of this go. And certainly we're going to see this in our examples. You know, I think the example out of Florida, Therese, really comes to mind. But there is not a rule book for how to handle what's happening right now. Right. I mean, this is completely different than anything that we've ever seen before. And it evolves in a way that is completely different than anything we've ever seen before. So the simple idea of what was 6 months ago could not feel more antiquated to me because we didn't even know what this world was going to be at this point, right? Like,
Right.
I mean, you can't play by the same rules. Those rules are no longer relevant. Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm excited. Let's start talking through these, Therese. I think that
sounds good.
There's some good stuff in here. So, okay. So Therese touched on this. She did a great job touching on this. Insular decision making. Okay, making decisions in a vacuum. Get rid of it. Like, really get rid of it. If you haven't already gotten rid of it, do it. You know, again, we go back to that patchwork pandemic term. Everyone is experiencing this so differently. And, you know, this is not, I also would like to back up and say, insular decision making is often, it's not intentional, right? I mean, everybody has teams of people that they work with every single day, where you are being paid for your expertise. You're being paid to make decisions and to think about how to approach problems with really great solutions. But I would challenge you to look around in those spaces, look around in those rooms, and ask yourself, you know, do we have enough diversity? Do we feel that the opinions that are in this room are really going to give us a sense of what's going on more broadly, and in many ways more specifically, right? How things are impacting specific people, specific communities, right? Like, are we doing the work that needs to be done to make sure that we are pulling in all of those varied opinions? You know, and that doesn't just involve sort of evaluating your own experience and your own bias, but also making sure that you have great channels there to connect and to talk to people who are outside of that room and make sure those voices and those opinions are represented too. And we'll talk about that more as we move on. But I think the fortunate thing in 2020, and you know, even just having this conversation virtually is such a great example. We are so connected. There is such an opportunity for transparency and conversation. People want to be heard. They want their voices out there. They want someone to listen to them. So how do we take advantage of that to make our organizations and our communities ultimately much better? So toss the insular decision making, okay? And here are some really, you know, I think, again, interesting stats that sort of paint what this picture looks like. So you think about how much conversation, I know within my own social circles, there were plenty of conversations going on around Netflix months ago before we reached the end of Netflix, to be honest. We've watched everything, you know, but you know, we're sitting there, we're fortunate, my husband and I and our family, that we're able to do things like watch Netflix, or we're able to, you know, log into some sort of Zoom dinner party, anything like that. Almost 43 million Americans don't have high-speed internet. So when you think about the movement to work from home, right, for so many people, that was a maybe simpler thing to approach. If you don't have internet and you can't do that, that becomes a much more sort of challenging thing. And you think about how that impacts kids, right? And some of the conversations we're having right now with the reopenings of schools, certainly you had children with no internet access who really could not continue their education as school moved online. So this I think, you know, just sort of presents you with how different this could be depending on who you were in this country and, you know, what you had access to. So
making sure that we're not making assumptions about the audiences that we're communicating with is critical here.
Yes, thank you.
Again, that whole idea of insular thinking is it's human nature to think that your own surrounding is the surrounding. It's very difficult. The most empathetic people in the world struggle with this every day. So remembering that what you think might be the best approach or easiest approach, because it's the world that you and maybe your inner circle, for example, might be living in, whether that's personally or professionally, remember these types of statistics and remember what's happening outside of those, you know, inner rings, for example. And that will help. It'll help all of us as we continue to communicate more clearly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, again, just kind of reviewing these stats. I mean, so another Pew Research stat from February to May, a quarter of young workers lost their jobs. And that's, you know, again, just to just a tremendous amount of people. If you sit and you think about that, right? So you've got stats like this. 62% of those who had a college degree were able to do the telework thing, right? Were able to make those arrangements. Only 22% of high school grads or those with no college experience were able to do the same thing. So you see immediately right there, you know, two very different experiences, just when you think about how we all kind of join this virtual world and this virtual experience. Now, one of the statistics that I've spent a lot of time, you know, thinking about here is this idea of, and we'll see if I can pronounce this correctly, because I was kind of rehearsing, and I'm like, I can say she session, I can do it. You know, this idea of the she session, but the fact that really for the first time in 50 years, now I also want to say, we have a list of resources at the end of this presentation that I'm sure can be made available, but places where all of this information came from. I would encourage you to do some reading about the context of a lot of this, because it's really interesting. I mean, we can only really scratch the surface in the time that we have, but this idea that 11.5 million women have lost jobs, you know, and often we're working in industries that were very hard hit, versus 9 million men. So when you think about that, you know, I look at this stat and certainly, you know, it's an interesting stat, but I also wonder, what's the long lasting impact of that, right? How does childcare play into this? How does whether or not schools reopen and what that looks like, how does that play into this, right? There's so much that I think about when I look at a stat like this and what the sort of long-term repercussions are from something like this and how it evolves. And Teresa, I don't know if you have anything to add to that piece.
Again, remember that, you know, when you're, depending on what industry you're in, we have several, you know, folks representing different industries today. Women are obviously, everybody wants that target market, and women make so many of the household decisions. So remember, if it's not you that's been impacted, which many of us have been, you know, personally impacted, this could apply to many of us on this call right now. If it's a target audience you're looking to capture, remember the mindset. This is a mindset discussion, right? So we look behind the statistics. What do the statistics mean? Well, it means that the mindset of the woman that is typically making these types of decisions, whether it's what car we might purchase, what college my child would go to, can we send them this year? Can I homeschool my children? Can I buy that t-shirt? You know, whatever it is, just remember the mindset. That's why you have to look behind the statistics a little bit more when you're looking to market to these folks right now in this environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And the conversations and, you know, the things that we could be saying or inviting feedback on social media, how are we doing that? How are we using that platform? You know, sort of to just wrap this all up here, listen a lot, keep doing that, do more of that, understand your own perspective and the perspective of others. You know, personally, when I talk about the work that I do, you know, I can't even begin to talk about how tremendous it is to get to be the person who collects stories from other people. There are so many experiences and things that I normally would not understand or, you know, or basically miss out on if I wasn't out there having these research conversations and learning about other people's lives. So, you know, beyond obviously just the value of being able to do that as an organization, I would encourage you to explore doing this because the value to you as a human being is also really tremendous, right? So listen, respond, improve, repeat. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about how there's no rule book in this situation and everyone's not going to do everything right? We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have to be vulnerable about those mistakes. We're going to have to own up to them and we're going to have to be better. And that's something that I think we all collectively have to get comfortable with and have a structure in place where we can really kind of continue learning. So with that, Therese, I'm going to hand it over to you because I want to hear you talk about this awesome, you know, example that
Sure.
you've got.
So we've talked about, you know, getting rid of these antiquated notions on how things should be. And I'm sure many of you over the past several months have needed to look at policies for internally how we handle employee issues. And one of those things, of course, working from home. Some of us already had those policies in place. Some didn't. Some had flexible work environments, alternative work arrangements, whatever we call this thing, working from home, everybody needed to face it, whether they liked it or not. And unfortunately, Florida State University made a big mistake. There's really no other way to slice it. So hoping that some of you are familiar with this, but we did include on the next slide an excerpt from a story in People magazine about this. Basically in March, the university communicated that they had this temporary exception to their policy, which allowed employees to care for children at home while they were in this temporary work agreement. And the university mentioned then in August that they would no longer allow employees to care for children while working remotely. I think everyone's muted, obviously, so we won't be able to ask you to chime in if you were familiar with this, but perhaps we can get into it afterward. You know, when you look at this quote, this lovely picture of this mother and daughter, she's saying she laughed out loud when she saw it. Well, Christy and I laughed out loud too, probably with the rest of the world that actually read this. You know, bottom line here is, you know, words matter, right? So clearly universities all across the country, you know, are facing these same issues. And again, it's that idea of the most empathetic person in the world when faced with dealing a crisis like this without a rule book could have all the best intention in the world and still make a statement that's incredibly offensive. What happens is how you handle it, right? We've all been there. There is not one of us on this webinar right now that hasn't had an experience where you've said or done something, and then all of you have to scramble in a room and say, we need to fix this, right? How are we going to fix this? It's crisis planning, it's crisis communication, right? The problem is, you know, you're only as strong as how you get back up. And unfortunately, the spokesperson in this case, you know, again, you can read it for yourself. Employees working remotely, they say now, can continue to care for their children at home. And as has been allowed since the beginning of the pandemic in March. It's all over the place. You know, they made a separate statement in August that absolutely contradicts this statement by the spokesperson. And the part that enrages me is that use of the word can. You know, that an organization of any kind would use the word can in communicating to a parent about how they can care for their child. A parent cares for a child 24/7, 365 for the rest of their lives. I know personally, my parents still tell me to this day, do you think it gets any easier now that you're old? No, it doesn't, right? So saying that someone can care for a child, just completely out of line. And the use of those words, it's really too bad. So again, this idea of microscope, right? Like we are under a microscope. In another situation, first of all, we wouldn't even be talking about this, but I think that we all get frustrated when we write, for example, and we might give our press release or give our statement to someone to review and approve. And again, we've all been there, you know, the nitpicking of the words and the can or the have or the should or the could, right? But the point is right now that matters more than ever. It matters more than ever in our environment. And making sure that you're not telling other human beings what they can and can't do with their dependents is very important. And this is just an example of how, unfortunately, there was no other way to come back from that but to apologize. And sadly, the apology was not there. Yeah. And remembering to be human, which is what we're here talking about, and just being real, which we'll talk about another example in a minute. about where someone was so real that, you know, I immediately made a connection with them and communicated personally with them. So keep those things in mind, please. Christy, do you have anything else that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's, you know, again, Therese, per usual, everything you said was, you know, fantastic on this topic. I think, you know, it was interesting. This was just another stat that we pulled where, you know, again, we're learning. There's information just coming out about the impact of kind of what we've all been going through in the past few months. But there was a survey that was run by an organization where they looked at, you know, this group of professionals who are working remotely and found that those with children actually, you know, and again, the difference here is small, but reported a 2% drop in productivity, I believe, versus being back in the office, versus those who, in this particular case, did not have children, that reported a 3% decrease. So I look at something like, you know, what we just saw, and I wonder to myself, of course, I'm sure there were all sorts of things that went into the decision to release that statement, but is it valid, right? Like what? Right. Where, like, to create sort of this whole catastrophe, you know, for them from a PR perspective, and then to see data like this, why put yourself through that? It looks like it's maybe not even supported by some of what may actually be going on. And I think we're
and again, remember too, sorry, Christy.
No, you're fine.
And remember, again, like, it's so important to remember there are other folks in the home that people are caring for. It isn't just children. So it's this whole idea of that working parent, and with the she session, oftentimes that working mother, that has become this, you know, it's been put on the billboard, really. And it shouldn't be, because what about those that are caring for ailing parents or other family members that might be in the home? I know several friends that care for nieces and nephews because that's the only way the parents can work. So again, it's making sure you're looking at things holistically and not pigeonholing a piece or a part of the community. So we can move forward for sure, though, to make sure we get through everything.
Yes, I think probably we have another maybe 10 minutes at this point. I want to make sure we have time for questions.
Yeah, and we definitely touched on this. So Christy, if you want to move forward, we can definitely do that too.
Sure, absolutely. So Therese is gonna, I'm gonna open this example, and then Therese, you have a very sort of personal thing that you want to share here with your particular interaction with this brand. But I think one of the things that we really need to look at tossing is this idea of what we termed me campaign. Okay. So if you're a retailer, if you're any brand really, there has been, I would say, a sort of gradual movement towards genuine authenticity in our messages. You know, it's interesting. I can remember being younger, and there was a lot of controversy around the use of Photoshop, for instance, in advertising, right? And kind of putting these images out there that were not reality. I think we've seen that conversation continue in the age of social media, when people are putting out sort of these very curated versions of their lives, you know, what you see from influencers and even people on your own feed, I'm sure, that are kind of friends of yours, and what they choose to put out there. There's been, I think, a movement away from that, and a desire to kind of see more reality and ourselves reflected more in marketing. So when a company comes out and kind of just talks about itself, you know, we're finding that at this moment in time, that appears to be particularly damaging. So Rag & Bone did a great job, I think, tossing this. And what you saw from them on social media, and again, Therese, your example, I think, is such a wonderful piece of this as well. But, you know, this very sort of honest, hey, we're all, you know, forced to be separate right now. Here's what unites us as human beings. We want to hear from you. Give us stories of positivity, humor, optimism, right? We want to take your content and we want to use our platform to highlight what it's like to be you right now, to share those messages, all right? Now, when you start to get into some of the data, again, that's emerging here, this becomes an even wiser decision, you know? So you're seeing A huge chunk from this this particular research study of 12,000 participants from countries all over the world, 71% of respondents said that if the brands that they are interacting with are putting profits over people, they will lose trust in that brand forever. That is an incredible statistic, right? It tells you how important it is to sit down and really think about what you're saying. Really think about the messages you're putting out there and what they say about you, your organization, and the people who care about you, right? Your shareholders. So this is something that, I think underscores a lot of what we've been discussing here. 77% said they want brands to only talk about products in a way that show they're aware of what's going on in people's lives right now. And again, you just saw that with Rag & Bone. 84% of respondents said they want advertising to focus on how those brands are being helpful right now with pandemic related challenges. Incredible. I think this data is just incredible to see. Now, is there a certain amount of fatigue that we're going to see with this? Potentially. There's also, I think been a lot of conversation around, again, the authenticity of those messages. Okay, like what are you saying and what are you actually doing, right? How are you helping? How specific are you being? Like, show me what you're doing, right? So there's a whole lot to consider here beyond just what's said. But again, it's about being genuine, and it's about this great example, I think, Therese, that you have from Rag & Bone. So go right ahead.
Yeah, so as Christy was saying, we're already seeing the fatigue because brands are hopping on board with messaging, but they're not putting it into action, right? So I think this is a pretty great example of a company that did it right and continues to do so. So for anyone that knows me, as active as I am in social listening, is as inactive as I am in actually socially broadcasting my own personal life. I don't necessarily respond much unless something really strikes me. And Rag & Bone is a brand that I follow. I love their products. And I saw a communication come out from their CEO, and we've clipped a piece of it here for you so you can see it. Bottom line here is that they lowered their prices. So for anyone who isn't familiar with the brand, they're a higher end brand. And they started out with like their t-shirts are very popular, and then they went into eyewear and a bunch of different products. Bottom line is it's definitely a high-end brand, seen as not very approachable, I'd say, by the sort of middle market. I think Christy could probably confirm that. They definitely are above the curve, a bit unapproachable, frankly. I never would have thought in a million years that a communication like this would come out from a brand like that. Very personal. And when they decided to lower their prices, and when I read the letter from the CEO, I actually responded. And I said, as you can see here on my Instagram, I said, I teach public relations. I'm going to share this with my students. It's truly a wonderful example of authentic communication during a crisis. And we, of course, in the interest of time, we can't show you all the communications, but there were actually several back and forth. And I talked to them about the fact that, the industry needed more communication like this, and kudos to their communication team, because I realize they are the ones that, craft these messages and that type of thing. So then they took it a step further and actually sent me a personal message, you can see here, saying that they saw the post, they were appreciative of it during this uncertain time. Thank you for being a part of the community. And they want to send me a shirt. And I was completely blown away by that. Now, I have some friends who have actually heard back from brands and received things, not very many, but a few. And it's pretty exciting, right? That you can see a brand is actually engaging with you. Well, I just completely lost my mind. And in fact, called Christy because I was so excited. And I thought, who can completely appreciate this, right? There's a picture there of the beautiful box that the t-shirt arrived in. And I actually had plans of wearing it today, but I wore it over the weekend. So, but nonetheless, I got this amazing t-shirt, which by the way, retails for $100. It's a white t-shirt. that I would not be able to spend $100 on a white t-shirt, especially not right now. And they realized that their loyal, consumers can't, which is why they lowered the price. And they started by lowering the price on that classic tee because it actually made their brand what it is today. It's the product that they launched with. So I think that's pretty cool. And I've told so many people this story, and all of my students this coming semester are going to hear this story about how a brand did this right. So I was excited to share it with all of you today. And again, I've told so many people that if it didn't make the presentation today, then it just wouldn't have been right.
All right, so I love this example too. I also would note, Teresa, when we were pulling this information, that the amount of, like, the level of engagement that Rag & Bone got off of this post was so much higher than a lot of what they were, putting out there prior to it. So I think it's interesting because, people saw it, people reacted to it, it's powerful.
And if you have it, and we don't have a lot of time, obviously, because we want to have time for questions and interaction, but if you didn't get a chance to actually read that message, or you don't follow them on social, take a moment, please do it. If for no other reason than to read that CEO letter in detail. It's very, very, very well written.
Yes, it is. The tone of it, it's great.
Yes.
So to kind of, again, wrap up what we've been talking about, just keep in mind stuff that worked yesterday, the messages that worked yesterday, they probably don't work today. And I think we're seeing that again in some of the emerging data that's come out. There was a particular study that found nearly half of advertisers have pulled campaigns, delayed the launch of a campaign, done what they can to kind of pivot around our current reality, what we're up against. So, coming back to Teresa's point at the beginning of this, this is PR's moment to shine, right? Read pop culture, understand kind of what needs to be done, how maybe what worked yesterday has to be tossed. What do we do to kind of move forward creatively? And also, the missed opportunity in not acknowledging this stuff, even if you feel like maybe you can stick with what you were doing anyway. The idea to demonstrate that you're listening, that you're human, is so important. Look at this as, to some extent, really a very rare opportunity to interact with people in a real way and to connect on what they're going through as we all kind of share in what's happening. So keep transparency, keep dialogue, and also think about how you can be intentional. Think about how you can be specific and know how that aligns with your values historically as an organization, as a person, whoever it is that you are, or whoever you're representing. Make sure that the decisions you're making also kind of take into account what you've done in the past. Okay, that's it. I don't know. Did we leave time for questions? Okay, we left 5 minutes for questions. So thank you guys all for having us. And Teresa, unless you have anything to add, I think we're good to kind of see what people have to say.
I'm excited, hopefully, for some questions. There were a few folks that chimed in on the chat. Tamara, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asked if the slides would be available afterward. Yes, and Michael recorded this as well. And Danielle, thank you for chiming in. I miss seeing you on campus. Danielle's one of my former students and is amazing. She's doing great things already in the world.
Well, ladies, that was fantastic. And I really love this, new approach, or kind of pivoted approach to actually paying attention and listening and doing some of the things that we always talk about that we're supposed to be doing. And, our current environment has really forced our hand in making sure that we are doing that. I know you addressed the questions about the slides being available afterward, and we can certainly make those available. If anyone has questions, feel free to hop in now, either through your live video or in the chat window. I guess the one question that I would have, maybe to get us started, is on one of the last slides that you ladies had there was in very simple: pivot fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is something that we would all agree is in many cases easier said than done.
Right.
So I guess, in the experience that you've had over the last couple of months, what is the approach that you've taken, and what is maybe the feedback that you've received from some of your clients, when you basically instructed them to throw everything that they've been doing out the window and start to be more person focused in how we're marketing and advertising?
Yeah. If it's okay, I can kind of start.
Sure.
So Therese and I both had a lot of conversations about this because we were both teaching when the pandemic hit. And I think, the first thing that comes to mind for me within the pivot fast space is how really this list of, innovators, if you would ask me a year ago, right, like, who are the leading innovators across industries? I may have given you a list of entrepreneurs, people in tech, engineers, and of course those people are still innovating. But I think there are amazing examples. There was one that I discussed it was a previous engagement, but there was a farm. It was actually out in Silicon Valley. It was an animal sanctuary, and they started this thing called Goat to Meeting, where because people couldn't come and visit the sanctuary, they could pay somewhere in the range of like $65 to $200 and something to have a llama or other farm animal join their Zoom call. Okay. When I saw this, I thought, first of all, great marketing, because how funny is that? And anybody could do something like that. Okay. Second of all, I did the math on this. They talked about how many requests they had. And within that brief period of time, I think it was a month or 2 months, they had raised like $30,000, right? And this is directional math. I don't actually have any insight into the amount that they made. But fast pivot, okay, coming out of an animal sanctuary. I think people who are part of these organizations that maybe we don't traditionally associate with that level of innovation, our teachers, our professors, our students who have been so incredible at adapting. They all are, I think, kind of rising to the top here in terms of how flexible and nimble they're able to be, and hopefully getting the attention and the praise they deserve for that. Therese, do you have anything to add to that too?
I completely agree. I with regard to the comment about students, I had more one-on-one conversations with my students when things changed mid-March, and they helped me so much in figuring out how to structure things so that they could be most productive. And again, it was me letting my guard down and saying to them, look, I just want you to be successful. Tell me how you can be successful. I wasn't concerned about putting my parameters around them. It was the other way around. And it's a difficult thing to do for some people. I get that. But I would like to think that our experience was a lot more productive because of it. The same holds true when you're talking to clients. I think oftentimes I advise, you're in ask for forgiveness mode internally. As a leadership team, you should be in ask for forgiveness mode because you frankly don't have time. Your organizations need to trust that you're making the best decisions possible for the organization. And again, it's a scary place to live in. It really is. But oftentimes because of that pivot fast, you don't have time to necessarily get everyone's checks, balances, and signatures on everything as was past practice. Internally, you'll have to advise folks that some things are not going to be all eyes. Yeah. In fact, the less eyes, often the better in a time like this. Again, go back to all of your training about crisis planning 101, right? Go back to the basics. Back to the basics of crisis planning and figuring out who really needs to be involved in this key decision. When you really think about it that way, not many people do. And it'll make your organizations much more efficient and make your clients really happy, make them look good, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great perspective. And I really like the way that you guys framed this whole conversation, where you're viewing this as this is really an opportunity to separate ourselves, to separate our brands from the pack. I think that the situation that we're in, and to some extent rightfully so, has made businesses and brands almost afraid to do things.
Yes.
And you know, just thinking of like, how do we mitigate any potential losses, or as much of the losses as we can. And you know, I'm looking at this from the same perspective that you guys really kind of put out there. Is the pandemic isn't certainly exciting, but I think the opportunity to find different ways to do things and to approach things is really an exciting thing for people who pride themselves on being creative. As much as we love baselines and data-driven marketing, I find it just as much fun to explore uncharted territory. And I think that is by being able to pivot quickly and be creative, you're going to find brands rise above others.
Definitely.
So I want to be.
And I
Oh, go
know,
ahead, Tris.
I know we have to wrap up. I just wanted to mention that again. It's that people first approach. You know, Christy and I both talked about our students rising to the occasion. Your employees at the ground level are rising to the occasion in ways that you've never seen before. So embrace that. Make sure that their voices are being heard. They offer the solutions oftentimes when those of us are in the room with our heads spinning. So remember, bring your own people to the table.
Absolutely. So I guess I'll put out just one last call if anybody has a question for Christy and or Therese. Okay, well, it sounds like you guys covered everything today. Once again, that was fantastic. Thanks to both of you for presenting and for putting the time into this. And thanks to everyone for joining us today for this conversation. Once again, I'd just like to say, if anyone who's listening today would like to share their expertise in a similar type forum, please let us know, as we'd love to have you and continue to move our profession forward. So thanks again for joining today, everyone, and please stay happy, healthy, and safe. We'll see you soon.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.